All right, let's bring John into the conversation. John McMullen, of course, 97.3 ESPN.com, and he appears via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. So, John, this was an interesting 180 turn of events.
Yeah, it certainly was, and it's not good from a standpoint of how it looks for the organization. You just read my tweet. That's my belief of what happened. But there's really only two explanations, and A is Doug's an idiot, or B, he was told he had to fire these guys, and neither is good. So, what camp do you want to be in? I happen to believe I've known him for a long time now. He's not an idiot. He's consistently brought up these two particular coaches for that reason. He understands the narrative. He understands the fan base didn't like them. He understands the narrative, and he wanted to stand by his coaches, and he wanted to bring his coaches back. And all of a sudden, he has a season-ending press conference Wednesday. He says they will be back, and make no mistake, he said that. And he meets Jeffrey Lurie Thursday morning, and they're fired. You do the math.
Yeah, so it seems like not everybody spoke to each other before this happened. How does that happen? How does that even occur that you go out there and put a press conference on and don't have all the I's dotted and the T's crossed?
Yeah, the messaging. I mean, from Doug's perspective, I think he was trying to save their jobs. I think he was trying to use what power he has as a Super Bowl winning coach to sort of push things in that direction. And it didn't work because it's very easy, and people can talk about winning press conferences and Doug fumbling in press conferences and not saying things correctly, whatever. It's very easy to say, we haven't finished our evaluation, got a lot of respect for the jobs these guys done. That'll continue in the ensuing days, and we'll make decisions later. Simple. He's done it 100 times. He understands how to do that. That's not what he wanted to accomplish. And that's why he had a different way. And it could be Howard Roseman, not necessarily Jeffrey Lurie, but somebody with more power than Doug in the organization overruled him. I don't see any other path that makes any modicum of sense beyond that one.
John, you said it's not what he wanted to accomplish. What do you think he did want to accomplish exactly?
He wanted to bring his coaches back. That was his goal. And he wanted, as I said, to use his bully pulpit, so to speak, if you want to use a political term, and the fact that he's a head coach. He wanted to drive that narrative. Again, I go back. If you guys remember the game, the post-game press conference against the Giants in Week 17 when they won the division, Doug wasn't asked about Mike Groh. He wasn't asked about Carson Walch. Certainly Carson Walch, nobody would ask him about Carson Walch in that type of environment. He specifically went out of his way to bring those two coaches up because he knew that, as I said, they were embattled. He knew their jobs were on the line. He did not want to fire them. He was told to fire them. That's what happened today.
Right, but you have to assume, like, how I look at it is there's no way Doug intentionally said what he did. Like, that was a slip of the tongue, or as soon as he said it, he tried to backpedal, which I think we saw shortly after he said it when he was asked, the questions that followed.
He did it 3 times, Ryan. He did it 3 times.
Well, he
went out of his way. He went out of his way to bring these two particular coaches up 3 different times. It wasn't a slip of the tongue.
Yeah, but
he wanted to bring these guys back.
No,
he wanted them back on his coaching staff.
Right, but I mean that could be true. But then why did he say, "I want them back" or "They will be back"? And then as soon as he was asked about Schwartz, that's when he started to backpedal and change everything. Then he said, "Well, we'll be evaluating everyone, and we don't know everything," or I don't know exactly what the words are now. But
the fumbling regarding Jim Schwartz, that was real, and that part, just because you fumble on one thing doesn't mean you fumble on another. That's why I brought up the 3 different occasions. It wasn't once. Maybe you can say it's a mistake if it's one time. It was 3 different times. When he brought up these 2 particular coaches over a number of weeks, and especially after that Week 17 game, it was 3 different times he tried to drive sort of this narrative to get them to a position where he could keep them. That's what he was trying to do. With Jim Schwartz, we talked about that earlier in the week. Yeah, that was strange. And it brought up all these things. Well, maybe they're on the outs. We always talk about Jim's personality, how it can grate on people. And that brought up some of those questions and the fact that Jim was interviewing for the head coaching job. He could have handled that better, no question. He could have said, Jim deserves to be a head coach. I hope he gets a head coaching job. If he doesn't, he's under contract with us. He'll be back as defensive coordinator. He could have handled that better, but there's just a consistent theme with those 2 coaches that went far beyond yesterday. And there's no need to bring those guys, especially Carson Walch, absolutely no reason. If you're bringing him up, you're bringing him up for a purpose.
Right. And that's true and everything else that was said. But what you're implying, and I'm not saying that you're wrong.
I'm implying the owner told the coach to fire these 2 assistant coaches. That's what I'm implying. I'm not implying. I'm saying it very declaratively. The owner told Doug Pederson he had to fire.
Is that a good thing?
Maybe.
I mean, is it smart? Is it good of Jeffrey Lurie to step in and say, you need to fire this guy? You got to get rid of these 2 guys, Doug. You got to do it.
Well, there's an old adage in coaching, and people credit it to Buddy Ryan when he was here, but many coaches have said it. But Buddy famously said it when he was the coach of the Eagles. He said, if you listen to the fans, you'll be sitting next to the fans. Jeffrey Lurie's listening to the fans. Hey, maybe they get a better offensive coordinator. Maybe they get a better wide receivers coach. If I were looking at this team, I would certainly, to be honest, have moved on from the wide receivers coach. You can make a case either way for the offensive coordinator. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's not Jeffrey Lurie's position. And if it's not Jeffrey Lurie, it's not Howie Roseman's position. Doug Pederson should be able to hire the coaches he wants. I don't think that's happened here, to be honest.
Interesting. So a couple things here then. Number one, so Schwartz and Reich were not his hires?
No, well, Schwartz certainly wasn't. I can say that with 100%. Frank, I think he was involved with, but they certainly didn't have a history together. Mm-hmm. But that's not, if you go back to 2016, I didn't have much of an issue with that. Again, there's a lot of revisionist history. Adam Gase was the coach they wanted. And again, it's better to be lucky than good. Ben McAdoo was going to be the hire. They had a welcome basket for him, all set up in NovaCare. He was on his way down the Jersey Turnpike. Literally, the Giants got him to turn back around. That also worked out for the Eagles. Doug was the third choice, didn't have a lot of power, didn't have a big name, and part of the agreement was that Jim would be his defensive coordinator. And then, as I said, I don't know how much. There's probably a little bit of input with Frank Reich, but not much. And it worked out. He and Frank got very close. And that's why I say, from Doug's perspective, Doug made a mistake after, to be honest, winning the Super Bowl. He should have, and most coaches in that situation would have, to be honest, seized more power. And at least from the perspective, if you don't want personnel power, that's fine. I mean, that might be a smart decision because those two jobs are so big that you really can't do them anyway. You just have to delegate and trust the people you hire. But as far as his coaching staff, by this point and where he is and what he's accomplished, he's earned the right to hire and fire his own assistants. I don't think that happened here. And I'll say it again. I just don't think that's what went on.
So let's start with Schwartz then. Anything today make you feel that Schwartz is safe, definitively back, or now he's shaky?
No, I think he'll be back. Obviously, as long as he doesn't get the Cleveland job, which I don't think he'll get. And he's under contract for one more year. It's pretty evident by the sort of backtracking that the Eagles want him back, that Jeffrey and Howie want him back if he doesn't get the Cleveland job. So what we just talked about, Doug doesn't have the power you should have. That would mean to me that Jim's going to be back.
So who are some of the names that are popping up for this offensive coordinator position?
Well, I think it's pretty clear going outside the organization. So forget about Deuce Staley. He's not going to be the offensive coordinator. And I think they're going to try to recreate the Frank Reich dynamic, and that means a veteran coach with some experience that can give a new sort of set of eyes to look at this offense. And my buddy Tim McManus already put out Jim Caldwell. That would fit that description. That type of guy, that type of coach, experienced veteran guy from outside the organization. That's how I think they're looking at this.
This has just been a bizarre situation, and obviously, I'm not trying to say that Doug's in any sort of trouble whatsoever, but is this the first maybe power struggle situation that he's been involved with?
Yeah, you might look upon this as the first crack.
That's typically what happens, John, when guy has coaches and he's basically told to make a decision. It's either you or the coaches. What do you want to do here? Well, yeah. or I'm not saying that it was you or the coaches, but being told essentially that you got to get rid of your guys is the first of like, hey, now you're not trusting me with my guys.
Well, and I wrote about this when the Eagles were 5-7, and this is one of the stages, and this is how I call it the scapegoating stage. So you see this happen all over the place. You saw it happen in Los Angeles with the Rams coming off a disappointing season. What happens? You need a scapegoat. It's Wade Phillips. It's not Sean McVay, but it's the first step. So that's what happens to all head coaches. You're not going to fire the head coach, but you need scapegoats. The two obvious scapegoats here were Mike Groh and Carson Walch. And that stage, we've hit that stage. So once you've hit that stage, the Eagles perform poorly again next year, you're past the scapegoating phase. Then Doug is truly on the hot seat. And then if you're 2 years down, you haven't turned this around, then you're probably talking about moving on from the head coach.
So it's really, because typically when we use the word or the term scapegoat, people relate it to the fans, but I'm seeing it as it's really a scare tactic for Doug more than it is, oh, see, we made this move, like to the fan base. Everything's okay. We're on top of it. But it's more along the lines of, no, Doug, you're losing your guys because we feel like you did not meet expectations.
Well, no, it's a little bit of both. I don't think it's an indication. Like I said, I think it was done more to acquiesce the fan base than to send a message to Doug Pederson. So from that standpoint, but the other part is it is the first stage, as I said. If you have stages of, if you look back in hindsight of when coaches get fired, they don't just get fired unless it's an absolute disaster. There's a first step where whether it's coordinators, position coaches that are sort of sacrificed. Well, this is the reason we underachieved. This is the reason we stunk. It's never true. Well, 95% of the time it's not true. It's just what happens in this league. And one of the reasons it happens that way is because it's a public-facing entity, and public relations is a part of it. And you are dealing with fans, and you are dealing with people outside who are looking at it, who are reading about it. So you have this public-facing organization, but everything is very secretive behind the scenes. So you have to signal we're doing something for the people that are so disappointed. Usually it's a mistake. Continuity is big in this league. And we've seen it throughout the league, and usually, and that's why I bring up the Buddy Ryan quote, if you have rabbit ears, if you're listening to people who don't have all the information necessarily, probably not making good decisions.
Just a very intriguing or interesting, I guess, couple of days here where all of a sudden, the Eagles need an offensive coordinator. They need a new wide receiver coach. But do you think they're done? Is there still more coaching changes to come?
Well, it didn't say anything in the press release. You would think the evaluation's over, and the evaluation was evidently 24 hours or less than 24 hours. So there are coaches on the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, you would say Corey Unlin is embattled. From a fan base perspective, they don't think very highly of him. We know Jim himself, but, Jim's so highly regarded around the league. I mean, he's getting head coaching interviews. It's tough to say at this point, and it's tough to say from this organization because they tell us one thing, and 24 hours later, they do the exact opposite. So the messaging looks terrible. This is not the first time this owner and this GM, who rarely speak, hang the head coach out to dry, who essentially is the face of the franchise, because the GM doesn't talk, the owner doesn't talk, and they hung him out to dry. That's what happened.
Who crafted that statement today?
Well, it's the PR people. It's not coming directly from the mouth of Doug Pederson. So it is what it is. I mean, it's part of being a head coach in this league. Everybody goes through it. Everybody has coaching changes, assistant changes. Very rarely the part, and I've been talking about this for months and months and months, this organization, usually it's about injuries when I talk about. This organization is terrible with messaging. And you saw it. It doesn't get any worse than this. Because, well, let me ask it from you guys have gotten my opinion. Let me ask it from your opinion. How do you look at this? How do you guys see this? To me, even if you don't agree with my assessment of the situation, there's really only two. And that's why I said the head coach is obtuse, or he was told to do something he didn't want to do. Do you guys see any other avenue?
Oh, I agreed with you. I feel that Laurie basically stepped in and said, no, these guys aren't coming back. You misspoke yesterday. Sorry, you gotta do something. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, I feel like they had the conversation before yesterday, though. And Doug misspoke, and then Laurie potentially got upset or said, no, you shouldn't have said that. Now we have to take care of this earlier than we wanted to.
Well, and I'm not saying, but then for me to believe that, Ryan, I have to believe the head coach is an idiot. I don't know other way to say that.
I mean,
well, that's
it's harsh for.
He didn't couch it. It wasn't inartful. He said they will be back.
Right. That's my point. Is I would have to think then he is. If I'm the owner, and I had the conversation with him, and said, do not guarantee anybody's coming back. And he went on this soliloquy about what these guys did, and the follow-up question was, but will they be back? And he said, yes, both those guys will be back. I mean,
yeah. I mean,
it wasn't like he said it
in our.
I know. No, it's bad, and it is borderline idiotic. I mean, if you want to call it completely idiotic, I'm not going to fight you on it, but I don't know what's worse. Doug having, however you want to describe it, a slip of the tongue or an idiotic moment, or Jeffrey Lurie literally not communicating anything with him and then just forcing his hand after that presser and say, no, now we have to fire both of these guys now.
Well,
I mean,
and that's where I said I think Doug was trying to steer this thing, because I think Doug is very aware, and that's why I don't think, by the way, he's a dumb person. He is very aware of the narratives around his team at all times. He reads everybody's stuff. He understands who each reporter is. He knows what they're saying. He knows what they're doing. I can tell you this with 100% certainty.
why do you think
He knew.
Go ahead.
He knew that Mike Groh and Carson Walch were particularly embattled, and those were the guys taking the most hits on his coaching staff. And that's why I bring up Week 17, when they won the division. And when he was doing his post-game press conference, he wasn't asked about those guys. He brought them up on his own. And that was on purpose. That wasn't just him feeling good, him saying, these are my friends. He could have talked about Press Taylor. He could have talked about other coaches. He specifically talked about those two guys and how effective they were in getting the practice squad guys up to speed and all that kind of stuff. So those two things are happened, and that's the type of coach that Doug Pederson is. So I think he knew he was meeting with Jeffrey Lurie this morning, and he was trying to steer a narrative, and he got slapped back, little clap back, and said, no,
crazy.
I'm not going to let you keep these guys. That is my assessment of what happened here.
Looking back on it all, I thought it was odd at the time, but now after everything that's happened, when the question was asked about Jim Schwartz, Howie Roseman got the heck out of the way.
Yeah, he did.
Right? He said, "I'll let the coach talk about the coaches."
Because I think there was a
Doug
little
as a
back
shield.
and
But he
forth.
didn't do that when he was asked about Groh. And I mean, so if they all had a conversation and they were all in on the no, I'm thinking to myself, why would Roseman turn it over to Doug if he didn't think Doug was it? Like, knew what was going on.
Right.
That's another interesting.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, well, the Jim part is a little bit tougher to explain, as I said, because I do think there was a little those comments were a little bit inartful, and they weren't, I don't know if they came out the way Doug wanted them to come out. Just didn't make a lot of sense on a lot of levels. And part of that is because it's so easy to say what I just said. You just, people, he went through it with Frank Reich and John DeFilippo. And you just say, I have tremendous respect for these guys. I think they deserve to be head coaches or offensive coordinators, whatever. And you say, but they're a big part of my staff. I'd love to have them back. Boom. End of story.
Right.
So the Schwartz stuff is a little bit stranger, and that's why it created all the talk that it did, and they had to talk that back and reverse that as well, and they started leaking stuff to Ian Rappaport. So the Schwartz, but to me, the two things are separate. I don't think necessarily you have to put them in the same category. And the fact that Jim is a lot, he's got a lot more experience. He's been around for a lot longer. He's the guy getting head coaching looks. I mean, he's settled in this league. Everyone knows him. Everyone respects him. He's a highly respected guy. Mike and Carson are young coaches who have struggled in their positions and are growing in their positions. They're at much different stages of their careers than Jim Schwartz. And I think Doug wanted to see them continue to grow, and I think he took pride in that. And as every head coach does, they want their guys. You want to be like Andy Reid, where everybody starts getting looks about getting promotions, and you have this sort of constant churning of good coaches. I think that's what Doug was trying to create here, and now it's not, because obviously Mike Groh is deemed a failure, and that does not speak well to Doug Pederson.
All right, John McMullen, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. If you want more on this, check out our website, 973ESPN.com. Thanks, John.
All right, thanks, guys.